Hey everyone, good morning. Welcome to LakePont Junior High. If you're watching for the first time, my name is Pastor Ethan, and I'm really excited about what we have in store for you this morning. You're about to experience some friendly competition. We're gonna stare until our eyes pop out, and we're gonna learn together and have some family discussion. If you're watching right now without a parent, make sure you go and get them. These weekly videos are built for you and your parent to do together. So press pause right now if you're watching without a parent, then come back and participate in Junior High Online together. Hey, really quickly before we jump in, a little fun fact about today. On this day in 2014, I asked my wife, Michaela, to be my girlfriend. I went to her house in Sudbury. It was like a 5-hour drive for me, okay? And so I got to her house and I asked her this question. I said, "Can I call you my girlfriend?" I had, asked her out a few times. She denied me for like an entire year. And so the question was more like, "Can I finally call you my girlfriend?" And this is what she said. She said, "Sure." And I'm like, "Come on, after a year?" And all you have to say is, "Sure, why not? Seems like a good time." But anyway, it worked out well. I just wanted to share that with you. You don't have to do anything with that information. I just wanted to celebrate with someone, okay? All right, let's buckle up because we're about to get into our online experience in 3, 2, 1. We are in the last week of our teaching series called Big Picture. And so I just want to share briefly about this idea that when you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. In this series, we're talking about Joseph, someone who had a lot of crazy and unbelievable things happen to him. But we see that all along, God was working toward a bigger picture in his life, even when Joseph couldn't see it himself. We're gonna see that Joseph has this huge opportunity to give his brothers exactly what they deserve, which was payback. But instead, Joseph chooses to forgive. And just like Joseph, when we can't see the bigger picture, we can choose to forgive too. There may be details of a bigger picture that we can't see or we don't understand, but we still have a choice to forgive. It's a tough choice, but I have confidence that you can do it. Okay, does anyone know what time it is? Competition time! Every week we have a friendly competition, and this week's challenge is where we're gonna put our strength, our eyes, and our straight face abilities to the test. We are going to have a staring contest. You're gonna pick a sibling or a parent and have a staring contest. The person who can stare the longest out of all our junior high families will win a $10 Tim Hortons gift card. I can't wait to see how long you can stare for. Just don't stare for too long or else your eyes will go a little crazy like mine did. Make sure you capture it on video Post it to our junior high Facebook group. The staring contest champion again will win a $10 gift card. Okay, my friends? In a moment, you're gonna watch a video that will walk through this idea that when you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. After we watch the teaching video, we're gonna turn this over to the parents in the room, and they're gonna ask a series of questions that are gonna pop up on the screen. I'll check back in with you before and after those questions to provide you with some instruction. So focus your attention, friends, to the last week of our Big Picture series.
Gosh, I don't know what to pick. Oh man, some Lays, some pretzels, popcorn too. Cool Ranch Doritos, we meet again. I don't know. Oh, hey guys. We are in the last week of our series on a guy in the Bible named Joseph. And it's called Big Picture. Well, Joseph had a lot of wild and weird and unbelievable things happen to him, good and bad. But all along, God was working toward the bigger picture in his life. The bigger picture Joseph couldn't see. Before we get into the last part of Joseph's story today, let me ask you a question. Have you ever tried to get a little payback on someone? Maybe a younger sibling who stole your favorite sweater without asking, or a friend who spread a rumor about you, or the guy in your small group who's always playing pranks on you? I have. You see, when I was in middle school, my younger brother and I did not get along at all. We were always pushing each other's buttons. We were always trying to get back at the other. But there was one day where I had a few friends over. We were just hanging out, playing Mario Kart. I was crushing it on Rainbow Road, and we were just having a good time, minding our own business, when all of a sudden, my little brother walks into the living room and just turns off the TV. Imagine that. Imagine being in first place on Rainbow Road, and all of a sudden the TV poof, off. I was a little upset. That's worse than any blue shell ever. That's worse than your best friend winning. I can let her have that and then beat her later. But to just have the television turn off and not know if I ever win, I was, fuming. So mad. My blood was boiling. My face was red. Everything was swirling around me. Horrified, furious, irate, enraged. I couldn't believe the audacity that he had to walk into the living room and just turn the TV off as if I wasn't crushing it. So as my little brother is laughing to himself, I do what maybe some of us do in our weakest moments. I look around for the first thing to throw, because I wanted to get back at him. And the first thing I see is a Nerf football. So I pick up the football, and I'm not thinking through my actions, but I'm thinking enough to think, I just want to teach him a lesson. And I throw that football across the living room. And apparently I was a little bit angry because it had a lot of force. And as I see the football traveling through the living room very quickly, I'm thinking this could cause more damage than I am prepared to deal with. And my brother sees it coming right towards his face, and the football hits him right between the eyes, right on the nose, and all of a sudden, his nose is bleeding, he's screaming, my friends are appalled at the situation they just witnessed. My mom comes running into the living room, she sees blood on his face, guilt on mine, and guess who got in trouble that day? Me. You know, your story might not be just like mine, but I bet you can relate. How do I know? Because in big or small ways, we've all been wronged. We've all been hurt. We've all been frustrated. We've all had someone do something to us or say something about us or treat us in a way that makes us want one thing and one thing only: payback. We want the other person to experience the same amount of pain or frustration or embarrassment that we experience because of them. Here's the thing, we all have the power to pay back. We not only have the potential to want payback, we have the power to actually do it. Sometimes that payback is public. We do something directly and openly to the person who wronged us. Maybe that's confronting them in the hallway with a big fight, or tagging them in a nasty post on social media, or doing something to embarrass them in front of someone else. That kind of payback isn't hard to recognize. It's out there for the world to see. And that's the way we want it to be. Sometimes the payback is more passive. meaning it's a little less obvious and a little more behind the other person's back. Maybe that's spreading a rumor about them, or moving seats at the lunch table, or just rolling your eyes when they walk away. Though the other person may not recognize it or feel the consequence of it right away, you're still getting the payback you're looking for in a more subtle way. Or maybe for you, the payback is just in your head. You haven't taken a step to actually do the payback, either publicly or passively, but you think about it all the time. You're constantly setting up scenarios in your mind of how to get the payback you want, and even though you may not actually take the steps to make it happen, it still consumes you. I know this all sounds harsh, but we're all friends here, right? So can we just be honest with each other and admit we've all felt that way a time or two? There's just something about payback that feels fair to us. But just because payback feels fair, it doesn't mean it is fair. It doesn't mean it's what's best for us. In fact, I think there's a better approach we could all take if we put down our power to pay back. Now, if there was anyone who had reason for wanting payback, it was our guy, Joseph. His story is full of people betraying him, lying about him, and causing him years of pain and suffering that he didn't deserve. Joseph was one of a dozen sons, but his father Jacob loved him the most. Talk about some awkward family dynamics. Because of that, his brothers got so mad that they threw him in a well and eventually sold him into slavery, where he ended up in Egypt. Then, when he was actually doing a good enough job where he was working to get a promotion in the house of this guy named Potiphar, Potiphar's wife made a move on Joseph. Joseph turned her down, so she made up a lie that got him thrown into prison. And there he stayed for several years before finally getting released and promoted to work for the Pharaoh. Whew, that's a lot, right? Now, if I put myself in Joseph's sandals for a minute, I can tell you what I'd be thinking about during all those years of slavery and separation from my family and imprisonment. I'd probably be thinking about the payback that I would give to everyone who wronged me if I got the chance. Wouldn't you? So let's pick Joseph's story back up and find out exactly what he did. At this point, Joseph was doing much better. He had not only been released from prison, he had been elevated to second in command over all of Egypt. Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of the distribution of food throughout the entire Egyptian empire. And that was a big deal because this was during a period of intense famine in the land. The famine, or food shortage, was so bad that people from far away started making the journey to Egypt to find food so that they wouldn't starve. And Joseph was the guy they were coming to for help. Now, of all the people in all the world, guess who showed up one day to ask Joseph for food? None other than his brothers. The very same guys who sold him into slavery years ago. What are the chances? While Joseph immediately recognized his brothers, they didn't realize who they were speaking with. It had been so many years since they'd seen him, they certainly didn't imagine the brother they turned into a slave would be a man with so much power in Egypt. And yet, there stood Joseph in a position of complete power before his brothers. They all needed his help. They all needed him to save their lives, and in that moment, he had the power to pay back all the wrongs they'd committed against him. This was the moment that Joseph could have been dreaming of, the moment when payback would finally be his. But take a look at what happened next. Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly, the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for there are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, you, your household, and all your animals will starve. Wait, what? Joseph could have done literally anything he wanted to his brothers. He could have paid them back times 1,000,000 for what they had done to him. He could have left them to starve or snapped his fingers and had them thrown in prison or even killed. That's how much power he had to pay them back. Instead, Joseph took a different path. He chose forgiveness. Can you imagine How surprised Joseph's brothers must have been. One minute they found out that their brother Joseph was alive, and then in the next he was embracing them rather than giving them what they deserved. Here's what I think we can learn from this part of Joseph's story. When you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. Joseph's response to his brothers gives us a powerful example of how God wants us all to deal with the people who wrong us. We may never know why they did what they did. They may never apologize for the hurt or embarrassment they've caused us. There are details of the bigger picture that we'll never see or understand. But we still have a choice: forgiveness or payback. We have the power to choose. Think of it this way. If you're in a relationship with another person, let's say a parent, a friend, a sibling, a boyfriend or girlfriend, anyone, there's something that connects the two of you. There's a bridge. But when someone wrongs or hurts you, that bridge is suddenly broken. It becomes shaky and the connection between the two of you is damaged. Then you're left with a choice. You can either burn the bridge, breaking it down completely by paying back wrong for wrong or hurt for hurt, or you can build the bridge, reestablishing your connection with things like forgiveness and grace and peace. Of course, I'm not saying you just keep rebuilding bridges with people who have hurt you deeply and repeatedly. Sometimes the best way to actually choose forgiveness is to set some healthy boundaries or talk about the wrongs done to you with someone who can help, like your small group leader. That's a great place to start. But when it's possible, it's our job to lay down our right to pay back and instead choose forgiveness. Joseph could have made the choice to prove a point. He could have fought to be right. He could have chosen not to help his brothers and burn the bridge between them. But instead, he chose to forgive them. And that changed everything. When you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. I'm sure some of you are hearing this and thinking, yeah, that sounds nice. But how can someone actually do that? How can you choose forgiveness instead of payback? That's a really fair question because honestly, this is really hard stuff. It's hard to choose to be a bridge builder rather than a bridge burner. And what can make it even harder is when we can't see the bigger picture, when we don't know all the details or the full story about the situation we're in. So how do we start? We start small. Practice extending things like grace, forgiveness, and peace to others in small ways. When a friend teases you and hurts your feelings, when your sibling eats the last piece of cake that you'd been saving, when your parents snap at you for something that wasn't even your fault, practice choosing forgiveness rather than responding with payback. The more you do this in the small, everyday things, the easier it will be to do it when the bigger things come your way. Also, don't wait for an apology to forgive. Think about your own life for a second. Who has wronged you recently? You don't need to wait for them to apologize to forgive. You don't need to wait for them to make the first move and say sorry for what they've done. The beauty of forgiveness is that you can do it on your own, right now. You can make a move to forgive first so that you can move on. Lastly, pursue forgiveness. We can't always control the way people treat us, but we can control the way we treat them in response. We can pursue forgiveness. What would it look like for you to forgive someone who has wronged or hurt you this week? Maybe it's an outward step, like starting a conversation or inviting them to sit with you again or unblocking them on social media. Or maybe it's a more inward step, a prayer you pray in your heart, or a choice you make to not say rude things, or a conversation with your small group leader to help you. Whatever it is, take one step this week to pursue forgiveness rather than payback in your relationships. Of course, forgiveness is not always easy, but the good news is we have a God who is the best at forgiving. He's forgiven each and every one of us, and He wants to help us do the same for others. And when we ask for His help forgiving someone, He will always give it. Today, maybe that's where you need to start. Ask God to help you forgive someone who has wronged you so you can start building a bridge toward forgiveness rather than payback. Remember, even when you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. Joseph's story is pretty crazy, right? I mean, he was part of a family in conflict. He was tossed into a well and sold into slavery by his own brothers. He fought off repeated invitations to have an affair with his boss's wife and was thrown into prison for something he didn't even do. Even though he went through all those crazy experiences in his life, Joseph eventually gained enough power to help and even forgive the family who got him into the mess in the first place. In the middle of all this stuff, Joseph couldn't see the bigger picture that we see today, the way God was working in his life. He just had to keep trusting and believing and making the next right choice to do what he thought was best. And eventually, years later, it all made sense. Things were made right. He finally saw the bigger picture. The same can be true in our own lives. As we wrap up talking about Joseph and how he forgave his brothers, I want you to think about this question. What is the hardest thing about choosing forgiveness? I'm gonna take 2 Doritos, okay?
When you can't see the bigger picture, we can choose to forgive. And we don't have to make this into some huge grand gesture. We can practice forgiveness in small ways. For example, your sibling accidentally kicks you in the shin. Our typical and immediate response is to accidentally drop kick them in return. And then you get into a big fight, and then you both end up crying, and your parents get upset with you, and at the end of it all you say, well, they started it. So instead of walking through that scenario, we can choose forgiveness. We don't have to wait for an apology. We can be the ones to make the first move and forgive the person who wronged us, even if we don't understand why they did it. So pursue forgiveness. We can't control what people do or what people say, but we can control how we treat them in response. So let's choose forgiveness instead of payback. When you can't see the bigger picture, what do? We can choose to forgive. So what's the hardest thing about choosing forgiveness? Let's talk about it through our discussion questions. Parents, this is where we turn things to you. You're about to see some questions on your screen. Take the time you need to facilitate meaningful conversation with your junior high student with each question. So complete the discussion questions, then come back to this video for some closing remarks. I hope you had some meaningful conversation together through those questions. Remember to post your staring contest video on our junior high Facebook group for a chance to win a $10 Tim Hortons gift card, and you could be showcased in our next video. Just head to Facebook, search LakePont Junior High, and request to join the group. If you aren't on Facebook, you could email me your video to ethan@lakepoint.church. To close our time this morning, take the next 2 minutes to pray together as a family, and then head to the LakePont app to access our weekday devotionals that go along with our series. You'll find them in the Family Resources section. Have a wonderful week, friends. See you next week.